Welcome to Psych Incubator. We are pleased to feature Laura Brown, PhD, as our guest this evening. I've known Laura for many years. She's a brilliant psychotherapist and scholar, and it's such a delight to have you here, Laura. Let me say a little bit about Laura before we get started with our discussion tonight. Laura grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. She received a doctorate in clinical psychology from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale in 1977. After completing an internship in Seattle, where she has lived since. Aside from a few brief stints as an academic, she has been in independent practice since 1979, although she stopped practicing psychotherapy in December 2018. She continues a practice of forensic psychological assessment, supervision, consultation, and teaching, writing, lecturing, and working to complete a new book, which I hope we can hear about, Decolonize Trauma Healing Towards a Humble, Culturally Responsive Practice. Laura's work in the fields of feminist therapy, trauma, culturally responsive practice has, to our great surprise, come to be considered foundational in these fields. Surprise, because she did not set out to be an psychologist. She just writes because it gives her pleasure. In addition to her many scholarly work, she has written 2 books for adult survivors of terrible childhoods. In her free time as a newly solo person, she practices Aikido, the marital art of peace, walks, reads as many mystery novels as she is able, travels as much as is safe, and contemplates mortality as she enters her 8th decade. She's living with a rare form of metastatic melanoma of the vulva. The case report, which was recently published in GADD Case Reports. Again, we're so pleased to have Laura. I've had the opportunity to interview Laura years ago when we were doing psychotherapists face-to-face, so it's so great to have you back to talk about your life and your work, Laura.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me back. And Michael, it's nice to meet you. Lizzie, it's nice to see you again. It's good to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Laura. We're going to kick it off by asking you, can you tell us a little bit about how you got to what you're doing today and what you've done in the past? What was your journey?
How you became Laura Brown?
How you became Laura Brown?
Well, born that way, but
I'm not sure.
So I had the luck, I didn't know it was luck, of growing up next door to Irving and Miriam Polster.
Oh, really? I didn't
Yes,
hear this.
and they had a daughter who sadly died very young of breast cancer, who was a month younger than I was.
Can you say a little bit about the Polsters for people who are watching who don't know who they are?
So Irving and Miriam were some of the great thinkers of Gestalt therapy. They took what Pearls had done and they made it into a truly humanistic, not sexist, because Miriam had a lot to do with that, genuinely thoughtful, interesting psychotherapy. And I just thought they were the coolest people. I didn't know that they were these famous people. They were just the house I wanted to go over to as much as I possibly could. And because their daughter and I were of an age, even though we were a grade apart because I'm the end of December, she was the beginning of January, we played together. We had to be quiet because Irv had his therapy offices built into the side of the house. So you had to be quiet because Irv was seeing clients. And Miriam started out as an opera singer. They lost a daughter to Rh incompatibility in 1959. And after that tragedy, she went back and got her PhD and became a psychotherapist. But I would always hear her singing as she was cooking because the window over her stove looked out over our backyard. And as someone who's a singer, that was also really inspiring to me because here was an adult who felt free to sing. So and then I had an interesting childhood. And so at the age of 9, I was sent to the school psychologist, who was an adult who listened to me. And I said, after our sessions had gone forward for a while, I said, "What do they call what you do?" And he said, "I'm a psychologist." And I said, "That's what I'm going to be when I grow up." And it's been a straight line ever since then.
Oh, wow. That's a great story.
For almost 60 years.
Wow.
And then I kept on going.
And going and going and going.
Yeah.
Good reading.
Wow, that's a great story.
And then I accidentally fell into being a writer, thanks to the development of the personal computer and word processing software. And discovered that when I wrote, people paid attention and wanted to publish it. So I just kept writing because writing comes to me easily. Because I'm dysgraphic, I learned to use a keyboard also at the age of 9, so that I could hand in legible things to people. And so writing on a keyboard also was my natural way to write. And I can't help myself. I like to write.
So now do you just dictate your books?
No. Oh no. I
click away.
what I do is when I'm doing my morning swim or a morning walk, I think about what I'm going to write. And then when I write books, I take month-long writing retreats, where I cancel everything else except Aikido and swimming and walking. And I just sit down and I write. And I take a month at a time or 2 weeks at a time, depending upon what's available to me. And I just do it. And then at the next retreat, depending upon how much I've gotten done, go back, edit, rewrite, write the new stuff. The book that I turned into APA about a month and a half ago, I think was on its 7th edit by me, and the last edit was in June, and I threw out 100 pages of stuff that didn't belong, and waiting for the reviews to come back. But writing generally is just something that is, for me, pleasurable. And I don't ever expect people to like or agree with what I say.
Well, a lot of people do, Laura. And
I know that's been the biggest
I want to
surprise.
interrupt you here because I want people to know that you are one of the leading experts and pioneers in the field of trauma. And I wonder if you could tell us and the people that are watching, like over the decades, your work with trauma, and weren't you the founder of the division of trauma in
One of them, one of the founders
so
of Division
you've
of
been
Trauma
very,
Psychology.
very much involved in the field over decades. Can you tell us, like, as you look back on your career, your pioneering work in trauma, what you now, as you look back on it, what you could take from that and offer to the people who are like, I'm still out there doing a lot of trauma work, and a lot of young people who are early career people. What could you take from your experience, your scholarly work, and offer to us and I know that's a tough question, but
that's the book. That's not tough at all right now.
But you have to say it.
I have to say
You only
it.
have an
I have
hour.
to say it as we say in
Yeah.
Hebrew, al regel achat, on one foot. So throw out the alphabet soup. It doesn't hurt to have the alphabet soup. I practiced EMDR.
So when you're talking about the alphabet soup, you mean that there are 400 different
all the alphabet soup of this thing
That's
and that
my
thing.
slide. Yes.
So what are the key things that you've learned?
The key things are, know that, with rare exceptions, the source of this person's trauma has been a member of our species, which means you. Know that for them to walk into your office is the most terrifying thing they can do. Work to earn their trust. Do not expect them to trust you. Actively identify and repair rupture, and take responsibility for rupture repair. Be willing to do that over and over and over again. Listen as if your life depended on it. Listen for what they're not saying, the things they're terrified to say. Notice the shifts that means that they've dissociated, not in the DID sense, but that they've gone away because something's too terrifying right now. Be open-hearted. Get care for yourself, because your heart will hurt if you do this correctly. Know that you are there to be a source of containment and hope to help people get closer to safety. Don't pretend that safety is possible, because for most people it really isn't. But be helpful in getting them closer to safety. Don't fall into the trance of despair. And realize that when they leave your office, they're going back into danger. Not necessarily overt danger, but we live in a context in the world where there is crazy dangerous stuff going on in the 24-hour news cycle that is nearly impossible for people to ignore. And so address that if you can, but always listen as if your life and their life depended on it. My dear young friend and colleague, Tyson Bailey, who is a past president of Division 56, finally got to give trauma psychology, finally got to give his presidential address at APA this year because he was president during the pandemic.
Can I just stop you 1 second?
Yeah.
I just want to stop and digest what you just said, Laura, is why when you speak, I just find what you say is so brilliant. I don't think you know, like what you just said.
No.
We want to just metabolize.
All right. So
it is on the mind, and you present it in a hypnotic manner.
It was
almost like one is drawn into it.
It's very poetic.
It was a brilliant distillation of the work that you do and that many of us strive for it. And I just remember why I fell in love with your mind. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Really.
And that's why I wanted to say the title of Tyson's presidential address is Exposure Begins at Hello. Because the minute you say hello, it's like you're exposing them to another human.
That is so profound. Yes.
Yes. I trained the kid up well.
You did. You trained a lot of people up well.
So thank you for the accolades. And I kind of think that this is just okay. This is why I don't see me as I am seen.
No.
Which is probably a good thing, or my head would be larger than the room.
There's always it wouldn't be larger. You just as you said, you would feel the pain of it. So
which is why I had to stop being a therapist. Because I could feel that my capacity to stay open-hearted was heading towards the reserve tank. And I didn't want to become one of those therapists who kept on working because I could and did half-assed work. I wanted to end the way I had done the work. I wanted to go out in a way that honored the work. So I gave everybody a full year's notice. Nobody quit. We spent the year saying goodbye to one another and having that be a part of the therapy. And then I was diagnosed with cancer 3 weeks after I had my last session. So it was good that I had that happen afterward, because I was able to be done and then have space for this rather large thing in my life.
But what you just summarized for all of us is a master therapist class right there. It really is. I mean, the points, and I love the idea that you really don't understand something till you can explain it to another person. And you just did it. And I think we're all going to go back and look at that.
Part I don't understand, and that is I didn't understand why you had to set that date. What it was, couldn't bear that hurting, or what was it?
Well, in the fall of 2017, I began to notice that it was harder for me to be there with a fully open heart, which I believe to be a necessity for the work that I do. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll take a sabbatical year. And the more I thought about it and I consulted with colleagues, the more I thought, no, Laura, you need to notice that the light for your reserve tank is coming on. Because I would come home and I would be just awash in what I had been in the office with, which is people with horrifying complex trauma from the childhoods from hell, who were these astonishing, luminous, amazing, decent human beings who were struggling to believe that their decision that they had to remake every day to stay alive, that decision was a good one. And there were other things happening in my life and in my world that I think were making it difficult as well. But it was that being open-hearted was painful. It's part of why I'm slowly sliding out of my forensic practice as well, because I only do forensic trauma work. And sitting in front of the screen for 6 hours with someone, as I just let them download the pain, I don't have that capacity to metabolize it that I had. And so just being self-aware, and I'm not claiming any, great, fantastic level of self-awareness, but simply noticing that this is what was true. And that I did not want to be some therapists I knew who just kept on going after there was nothing in the tank. I mean, I could do therapy on autopilot now. I could do fine therapy on autopilot. Most people would have no idea that I was on autopilot. But it would violate my integrity and my sense of my values about how to be a therapist.
Mhm. Well, just hearing that is, it's maybe rude, but makes me care about you.
Oh, thank you. That doesn't feel rude. I love that. Thank you.
And I don't understand it totally, because it does hurt like hell to do group therapy, right? Because you are touching on, you feel these things that you wouldn't feel otherwise. You feel much more because you're doing. But it is, it's the constant flip between the love and the loss, the trauma and repairing the trauma, whatever dyad you want. And so it's I get in trouble because I don't want to stop. I can't stop munching on it. It's just the most delicious food in the world. And that's the part I don't understand.
No, I think it has to do probably with how you're configured and how I'm configured.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
it's part of why I've continued to be a supervisor and consultant to a lot of younger trauma therapists, because I can be with it, but slightly at a remove. So my heart can be open to other therapists.
Gotcha.
And it's something I can hold with the love that I held the people who were my clients. And I should note, I got my PhD when I was 24. I started really young.
Yeah.
And the truth is, I started at 9, sitting in a dark kitchen, listening to my depressed mother say things you shouldn't be saying to a 9-year-old child. So, most people get their PhD a little older and, start this up a little older and can go a little longer. And it is a good thing that I was done.
I don't know what the reason is. It's not. I just will ponder. But I'm. So when did you start to get in touch with all these things that you're talking about now? Because it's, if you're the generation, we're close in age, and
Yeah.
I think it was either behaviorism or it was Freudian analysis, and I got into a lot of trouble because I kept not doing it. I just didn't find it that productive, either one. And so I made a series of explorations and failures in my life. But finally, by chance, something happened and boing, I could put things together.
Mhm.
So how did you do that? How did you put it together? Because you did it a long time ago. You,
Well, part of it was that I came into graduate school calling myself a feminist therapist.
Mhm.
And I had already read some of the founding works of feminist therapy. I went to my first feminist psychology conference my second month of graduate school. Um, so I was taking everything I was learning and passing it through that lens. And then the other thing is that at my program, the strongest teachers of therapy came out of humanistic traditions, neither behavioral nor psychoanalytic. We had an Ellis protege. We had someone who was a radical behaviorist, but we had people who taught from Rogerian and Gestalt perspectives. And so I'm really steeped in the humanistic tradition. I mean, we got graded on what Kharkov level of listening, active listening ability we could demonstrate. Um, and for those who don't know what that is, Kharkov
Thank
was
you.
one of Roger's students, and he gave ratings from 1 to 5 of how good your empathy was. And I was influenced by that. And so the first thing I had to learn how to do was to demonstrate at least a level 4 Kharkov response. Level 5 is, very hard to get. But you had to demonstrate a level 4 Kharkov response in the recording, the reel-to-reel recording of therapy sessions that you turned in. That was the basis and core of my training.
Okay.
And so I skipped psychoanalytic completely, partly because feminists of my era did not think very highly of Freud, and it was, old ego analysis and quite sexist and problematic. And behaviorism didn't show up until I was done. And I was already saying, where is it written that you should do therapy like fill in the blank? Because that was feminist therapy's role, was to question and critique what was going on. But the core of my therapy training was humanistic. And I went back to Rogers recently because I read a lot of Rogers when I was an undergraduate and thought, the guy had that right. He had it right that this was something that required that ability to listen and be curious and to prize the person across the room from you, and that it didn't require getting extra letters after your name to do that. And he was right. And then he kind of gets this, pro forma treatment, if anything at all. Most students don't learn active listening any longer. But that's why I got here, because there was a guy who taught at Southern, Vince Heron. He'd been a Roman Catholic priest and left to get married and became a psychologist. And he taught the basic skills class. And he said, a good therapist has high tolerance for ambiguity. And that was the other thing that I got in my first week of graduate school, was you have to be willing to hang out and not know. And then I read a lot of science fiction that said the same thing. So I don't simply read professional books. I read anything with a word in it, but a lot of speculative fiction, which teaches you to think about what is possible that seems impossible. See under extreme Star Trek fan here.
So how much of what's going on with you do you share with your clients or patients?
It depends upon who they are, because the question is, who is this person? Where are they developmentally? Have they learned that I am worthy of trust? Who am I? Cui bono? For whose benefit am I sharing this? I learned that I have a somatic tell, which says, shut your effing mouth, Laura Brown. And it's a somatic tell, which is, I'm about to share something that's brilliant and wonderful. It's like, no, shut up. And it's this warm, fuzzy feeling inside myself. And I learned by getting feedback, and the research on getting feedback is very free. Before it came out, I learned, listen to the people across the room from you. I learned that was my somatic tell. I also learned that my unconscious speaks to me diagonally from the right with song and lyrics. I have a jukebox somewhere out here.
Mhm.
And
Do you
so
sing the
when
songs to your
so
patients?
when no, well, sometimes I would record lullabies for people to help themselves soothe themselves as a kind of auditory transitional objects. But if something came from the jukebox, I would usually share something about it. Like I might say, I'm kind of curious. Is it possible that X might be going on right now and it's being hard for you to talk about? And after a while, people would say, is that your jukebox? I guess, like, yeah. Because I would say to people, because people say, how did you know? I'd say, well, I have this jukebox and it always comes from here. Uh, infallibly.
That's interesting. I think I have a similar thing that goes on with me that I've been noticing more and more is that I tell people that I have some inner voices that sometimes talk to me, and I'm not psychotic, trust me, but sometimes my voice is saying, like, wants to say something to you, and I'm not sure if you want to hear it, and it might be completely wrong, and it might be my own stuff, but and if they say it's okay, then I'll say it. But sometimes it's like just that jukebox, just picking up at some very deep level and linguistically tuning it. And then I feel like I'm an optician. Is it this lens or this lens? Which is it? That one better or that one? And then they're like, "Oh my God, yeah, that that one's yeah, yeah. I'm not lovable. That's it. I'm whatever it is." So that's an interesting, like, is that maybe listening with the third ear, which Reich talked about a long time ago? That third ear.
And also being a singer, having this enormous collection of songs and lyrics from the mid 60s through the early 80s. And
All
then
stored up in there.
all stored up in there,
Oh
and
my
then
God.
add on Sarah McLachlan. But yeah, I've got this enormous
Treasure
jukebox.
trove. Yeah.
And one of the things I taught people when I started learning polyvagal theory is that if you sing to yourself, or if you can listen to a woman's voice singing, that will help you. And so people would say, well, you're a singer, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, okay, can you record something for me? So I would record a lullaby in Yiddish, which was a language none of them spoke. But it's the language in which I know lullabies. So they would have that auditory transitional object.
Oh, that's cool. Can you just mention a little bit about Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory for people who might not be
Oh my
aware?
gosh. So Stephen Porges was studying non-human creatures. And all mammals have a polyvagal system. We have ventral vagal, which is the part of the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve, big nerve, comes out the back of the brain stem, goes down through the entire body. It's I forget, cranial nerve 10.
Yes,
And it
26 miles.
also it innervates also the larynx. It innervates the social engagement system of the face. So ventral vagal innervates heart and lungs, and dorsal vagal innervates everything below the diaphragm, and is the unmyelinated vagus system. People who've been traumatized go into dorsal vagal shutdown. And one of the ways to get people out of that and back into ventral vagal open-hearted connection is to sing, to listen, because it turns out the sound of a woman's singing voice, lullabies, are an evidence-based way to move people from being frozen in terror to being able to be connected and more alive.
Wow. Thank you.
I'm not going to say you're being sexist, because
No, Porges says it's a woman singing voice.
Because when I sing to my patients, usually they don't get as much pleasure from it as I would like.
No, I think this has to do with the fact that, infants of our species hear the voice of the woman who's carrying them. But the data are that it's women singing voices. Sorry, guys.
Well, I think
I buy it completely.
when we have same-sex marriages, and one plays father and one plays mother, one I assume that the mother one is going to sing the lullabies and take on more of those roles.
No, not necessarily. Because one doesn't play father or the other mother. They play parents differently. So there's mama and mother, there's mama and mommy. There's rarely, if someone is butch as can be, it's mama daddy. But everybody does all parts of parenting because it doesn't have to do with the gender presentation or whether you were the person who gave birth. Speaking as someone who's a part of that community and has been seeing my friends giving birth to babies in their lesbian relationships for a long time now. Like
Good.
some of those babies have grandchildren now.
There's still hope then. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, you know, a not a ton of people are doing what you're doing, unless I just hang out with the wrong people. I mean, you seem to be really getting people to feel that you care and getting them to feel safer with you than they would be elsewise, and that they gradually begin to open some of those doors that are painful in a safe way and feel better about themselves because they see they care about this person who they see in front of them doing this work, and they care about how the interaction goes. So this, you know, you're probably going to get a lot of phone calls asking for supervision after tonight.
Emails, please. Emails.
But is the nexus of your community is where? I mean, who?
Well, it's the intersection in the Venn diagram of intersectional feminist therapy and trauma therapy. And so Christine Courtois, for example, who is an old and dear friend, does this work. And Judith Herman, who helped create this field, does this work. And Steve Gold, who is very active in the world of trauma therapy, does this work because many trauma therapists have sort of moved in the direction of intersectional feminism, even if that's not where they started. Because if you look at how people encounter complex trauma, it's very often gendered, and you have to think about gender and culture and context and social class and all those pieces. The current president of the American Psychological Association, Tama Bryant, does this. Lilian Comastillas, Beverly Green, who do what's called womanist and mujerista feminist therapy. So there's a community that's sort of scattered internationally, nationally and internationally, and we write to each other, we write with each other, we talk to each other at conferences. We are each other's extended family. They are the only reason why I go to conferences anymore, is to be with my family of those people. And sometimes we call each other up and say, can you believe so-and-so said such and such? And I think one of the things that you can say about most of us is we didn't intend to be eminent. We didn't found an institute named after us. We tried to share what we do in as humble a way as possible. And we know that we're going to be wrong a lot of the time. And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing, to know that we will be ignorant and wrong a lot of the time.
Great. So that's the last step is the easiest one.
Indeed.
You know, I feel like I've been grabbing a lot of your time. I'm wondering if
Lizzie?
Liz want to say something.
Yeah, I'm curious about you mentioned reading, walking, swimming as important activities for you. Could you share a little bit about any other ways that you take care of yourself? And also, what has been most transformative for you in your life so far?
So the big thing that answers both questions is Aikido.
Can you
I
share what that
start,
is? Not even.
Aikido is a Japanese martial art. That was invented after World War I by a man, Morihei Ueshiba, who had black belts in every single other martial art, more than a black belt, second, third, fourth degree black belts, and came out of World War I realizing that conflict was wrong and fighting was wrong, and created Aikido, which is the art of peace. It is the way of harmony. And I took it up. I had read about it when I was in graduate school, and I've been fascinated by it. But I was a klutz. I failed PE. I was terrified of anything that smacked of being physical.
Aggression.
Yeah, but no, not aggression, anything physical. But then I read a New York Times article in the health section that said the biggest risk factor for falling in women as we age is the fear of falling. Well, I had a big fear of falling owing to freezing in fear at the top of Masada in Israel when I was 14. Long story, other time. And B, my mother, who was a trauma survivor, a childhood trauma survivor who was frozen, had fallen probably 40 times and broken bones, including her skull, multiple times. And so I thought, I need to learn how to fall. I knew in Aikido you could learn how to fall. So I thought, okay, I will go to Aikido, I will learn how to fall, and then I can quit. So I Googled Aikido Seattle. There was a place that had beginner classes. I went, I cried in and after every class for 2 years. But after I'd been there 2 weeks, I knew this was something I had to stay with, that there was something there for me. And also that I had to finally do something that I wasn't immediately good at, because it was immoral of me to ask clients to do hard things and for me to quit the hard thing. So I did it until one day I went into the dressing room and turned to a friend and said, that was a really fun class. And she said, Laura, did you just hear yourself?
Are you
Oh,
enjoying this now?
oh, and I'm now in the process of starting to work on my 3rd degree black belt.
That's amazing.
And it has transformed me because I'm in my body, because I got into my body and so I could remember some childhood trauma that was in my body that I had nicely tucked away in a body that didn't move very often, except in the pool, where this didn't get activated, because no one touches you when you're in the swimming pool. And Aikido is, imagine Tai Chi on steroids. It's very flowy, and you help people fall down. Somebody comes at you like this and you're like, oh, you really want to fall down on the mat, don't you? That's what you really need to do. That's what your body wants to do, because you're behaving in a way that could be interpreted as aggressive. So let's have peace. Be on the mat. And it transformed me completely, because I'm in my body and it's a spiritual practice. And I've discovered it as a trauma healing practice. The last 5 years of my work as a therapist, after I was close to my first black belt, I began to integrate it into my work with some trauma survivors. Because what I learned in Aikido is that if someone seems aggressive, you can unfreeze and protect yourself. So helping people to learn to, because what would happen to me the first several years is someone would come and do this thing. There's a thing where they're pretending to chop you over the head with a pretend sword, only it's their hand, or it could be a wooden sword. And I would freeze, so I get hit. And you have to learn to unfreeze and step away, and then help them fall down. So I began to integrate that into some of my therapy practice. In November of 2019, my sensei, my teacher, the head of the dojo, and I, and she's also a retired therapist, presented a workshop on Aikido and trauma. We were going to do it again in April of 2020. Ha, ha, ha.
Not so much.
So, but probably after I do my Sandan, my 3rd degree black belt, we will go back to doing that, because the dojo's open again, and people can come in and wear their mask and be okay. So it's transformed me. It's also given me a community that aren't psychotherapists. And it's allowed me to be to be stuck in something and not just be the best and the fastest, but to have the experience of, oh, I am competitive. I used to say I'm not competitive. I only compete with myself. I discovered that when people came and they were, whizzing past me, and I was like, what is this person doing? I was like, oh, you are competitive. You never knew it because you never tried to do anything. If you couldn't do something fastest and bestest, you just quit. Because there were plenty of things I was fastest and bestest at. And it's taught me a deep compassion for myself. As one of my teachers says, you cannot take your inner critic onto the mat with you. So I've had to learn not just to fall on the mat, but to fall in every aspect of life and say, oh, I fell. Oh, now I'm going to get up and be compassionate with myself and try again. So that's been one of the self-care. I go to the dojo at least 5 hours a week.
I think that should be the title of your next book.
What?
Go to the dojo.
So that's a big self-care. The other transformative thing, and this may or may not surprise people, is for about the last year, I've been doing psychedelic assisted therapy, which, because ketamine is the legal one here in Washington State, is the one that I have been gaining access to.
Mhm.
And I can talk circles around a therapist, gesund. And I have talked circles around way too many therapists. You cannot talk circles around psychedelic assisted therapy because the medicine takes you. And it's not suited for everybody. It's not like everybody should do this kind of thing. But what I knew is that I needed to do that because back in the day, in the 60s, let's just say, I had some experiences that let me know that this was a thing that I would like. I didn't know it was a thing that would be the most profound healing work for myself I'd ever done. And it has been and continues to be. And it's mostly work you do with yourself. So the medicine takes you, and if you're willing to go where it takes you, and then to use that and work with that and move with that.
You do this with a therapist or
Well, you do it with a person
Coach.
who is, I'm not actually sure how you would describe them. Everyone who does this at the place I go to is certified by an organization called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary
Yes, I know that.
Association
I started to apply for
Psychedelic.
training with them.
Yeah, so they're all MAPS certified. But all the person does, so if you do it in the office and you do in Washington State, at least at this place, they do IM, intramuscular injection. And then there's a home version sublingual, which I've been doing for the last 6 months. But the 3 in-office sessions I did were IM, and the person sits there while you've got noise canceling headphones with and a soundtrack that they put together and light canceling goggles, and they just take notes ferociously on their computer, which I never heard the keypad of for a moment. And you go where the medicine takes you. And then they help you talk about it a little bit afterwards. You have an integration session afterwards. But most of the work, most of the therapeutic work happens when I take it back to my therapist, who I finally found someone I can't talk circles around.
Oh, wow.
And also because I can work with myself. Because Laura, the therapist, shows up for Laura, the person, and says, notice this thing. If this were your client, what would you say? And that's been helpful to have. But
have you noticed there's certain people that you could identify, certain types of people that it might be more helpful for than others, or does it totally depend?
Well, I think it totally depends. But if you are like me and you can rationalize and intellectualize your way past even EMDR, which I did. If you're the person who the therapist loves because you're so interesting to work with, and so you manage to avoid really getting into the deep stuff, and you have a strong enough self that you can lose the self, because you do lose yourself. You lose your body, you lose yourself. You're someplace where there isn't a you, and that's a good thing.
For some people.
Well, okay, it has to be a good,
For
has to
some
be a
people,
good thing.
it's a
I mean,
psychotic inducing
okay.
kind of.
Right, and
You
so
have to have a self to lose the self.
right, right. That's what I'm saying. You have to have a self.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that.
Let go of
Right.
that.
Yeah, you absolutely have to have a self.
Yeah.
And you have to have a good support system. You have to have a soft place to land, which is why my marriage ended, because it was not a soft place to land. It was becoming more and more clear to me that the voice in my head that had been saying, get the hell out of here, the medicine was like, you need to get the hell out of there.
Wow.
So very transformative.
It sounds like
Yeah.
both those transformative processes for you have been very self-reflective and
Mhm.
taught you a lot of mindfulness.
Mhm.
It sounds like, yeah.
Yeah. And also cancer. So I was supposed to die 2 years ago because I had a very rare form of metastatic melanoma. And when it metastasized to a place that nobody knew what to do with, my team was looking at me with these very sad, frightened looks on their faces. And then my outpatient dermatologist said, you know, there's this new injectable, and no one's ever injected it into the body part where you have cancer. And my surgeon said, you know, once I take it out, it's gone and you're going to die anyways. So I said, okay, let's try this thing. And it worked.
Wow.
It worked. A year ago, I was still getting injections every other week and infusions once a month. We were at the end of the injection cycle, but I was in the spring of 2021, I was in a place of you could die. And so when you're looking death in the face, you have to tell yourself the truth about who you are, about what you want, about what matters. And let me just say that the pandemic kind of amplified that, because the things that I couldn't do during the pandemic, like see a lot of people I loved in person, the clarity of I must be with these people was amplified by what everyone thought was a relatively near-term death sentence.
And isolation from COVID.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny because I did well enough during COVID, during the first year before the vaccines, because, you know, A, I'm an introvert, B, we weren't in formal lockdown, so C, I could, you know, sit on my porch. And, you know, have a collection of very beautiful masks, you know, masks as fashion accessories. So embrace the mask. But realizing that I could be dead and not see people I loved, holy crap. And that made me aware how much I loved these people. It's like I knew it, but I really knew it.
You really felt it then. Wow.
Oh my God, yes. Yes.
Mm.
Heavy
Well,
stuff, yeah.
Incredibly good of you to share this. I mean,
Yeah, it's
the sweetness of this connection you have with these people is.
and I just
They're
want,
my family.
yeah. Mm.
I have one more.
Okay, go.
Laura, what advice would you give to young people in the field, or any message or words of advice that you can pass along?
Learn about the evidence-based psychotherapy relationship variables and make them core to everything you do. Because the data are that all the rest of the alphabet soup maybe accounts for 10% what
Mm.
happens in therapy, but the relationship, you, the therapist, the client, the context, your intersectional identities, that's where the healing happens. And those data are strong. They've been well replicated. Go read John Norcross and Barry Duncan and Bruce Wampold and read their stuff and then throw it back at the people who say, but you have to be doing CBT.
Mhm.
You know, one of the things I love about functional analytic psychotherapy, which is an alphabet soupy thing, is that the core of FAP, even though it's also very behavioral, is the relationship. It's all about the relationship and taking risks relationally in psychotherapy, and having the courage to love in the psychotherapy relationship. So learn the evidence-based psychotherapy relationship variables. Go back and read Carl Rogers. Read Art Bohart's work on empathy. Listen as if your life depended on it. Let yourself be wrong. Let yourself fall down. Get good consultation from the start, from multiple different people. And have joy in your life. Every morning, in addition to all the other things, is I put on Earth, Wind, and Fire's greatest hits and I dance.
I love that.
I dance to the mountains. And it's fun.
Laura, do you believe that there's a phenomena that we've called quantum change? I studied this years ago, and I was just wondering what you think about. Are there opportunities in people's lives to make a profound transformational change that happens very rapidly and is very profound? It's called quantum change in the research literature.
Well, I think there are, and most people are terrified of them. Most people say, oh crap, let me run as fast as I can in the other direction.
Mhm.
And that's okay. They don't have what is necessary to leap off the cliff.
Mhm.
They don't have what they need to support their leap off the cliff. It's the fool card in the rider weight deck of the tarot. The fool's walking off the cliff knowing that they'll be okay.
Mhm.
Those moments happen in everybody's lives. And I've been fortunate. I've been incredibly fortunate to have had some of the time what I needed in order to step off the cliff, embrace the monster, walk
Can
through
these,
the door.
can these be induced in the psychotherapeutic relationship? Like, or is there a way
Yes.
to capture that?
Yeah. Because if we create the net, if we say, what I will hold you, and we keep on holding them, and we never shame them for getting to the edge of the cliff and turning back, but say, look how much courage you have had simply to climb to the cliff.
Mm.
And then when the person is ready to jump, that we step toward them and catch them well. And then say, look at what you just did. Let me bow in honor to your courage. Not, oh, look, I caught you. Look at what you just did. And then help them integrate the fact that they did that. Because most people are like, oh crap, what did I just do? And it's like, okay, we're going to breathe. We're going to look around the room. We're going to do name 5 things. And I'm going to bow in honor to your courage.
You give to them, you honor them.
Yes.
I want to ask you a question about this because I've used the jumping off the cliff metaphor. And people are naturally not me. And one of the things I do is I say, what if we link arms and we jump together? And they say, I don't know. I said, well, I don't think so. Have you done this before? I said, and they said, and how many times? I said, probably 100. And what happens? I said, well, it's the damnedest thing. There's always a soft landing. And they say, really? I say, yeah. And so we jump. And then the air rustles by. There's maybe some branches that are sticking out at some point or something, but you hear the wind. When is this ever going to end? And then eventually it ends. And I say, what was it like? They say, it was kind of like landing on sand. And I say, yeah, sand. Okay, so what are we going to do now? And they say, I don't know. And what happens then is they begin to explore what's down there, and usually some light at some point they find, or a brick they can pull out of the side and dig into something. And there's, frequently they're out in the middle of nowhere, or cactus is there. You have to build shelter and all these. You begin a little camping expedition and begin to together find out what's going on in the world around you. But it's this strange thing. It's all, always a soft landing. And I don't know if, I can't think of a better person to ask about this, since people don't do too much jumping.
Well, I think that preparing people and having them realize that they've already jumped off the cliff 1,000 times in their life,
Mm-hmm.
that they've already faced greater monsters than the ones that live inside their heads, and honoring the courage that got them to walk in my office door alive and a decent human being. Every one of my clients know the Yiddish word mensch, decent human being, which I'm in Seattle. People don't know a lot of Yiddish out here in Seattle. It's not like the East Coast, where it doesn't matter what you are, everyone knows what a mensch is. And I would say there's a Yiddish word for what you are. And you manage despite all odds, because you have a free ticket to be the worst human being possible. Because a lot of them did. I mean, they grew up they grew up in hell.
Somehow they managed to not.
Right. And they were loving parents and loving aunts and uncles and
Right.
teachers and therapists.
How does that
and
happen, Laura?
I think it's kind of the anti-identification with the aggressor.
But I'm still intrigued by that, because I don't think it's just the anti-identification. There's something.
That's a starting point. Yeah.
There's something else, because I meet with a lot of people that I think that have gone through these horrific experiences and have done so well with their own kids and their own spouses and partners. And I'm thinking, you could be a criminal. Like, I have people that their fathers robbed banks and murdered people. And how did you turn out the way you turned out?
And they made a commitment to themselves as a part of it. A lot of them remember thinking, I am not going to be like this. They found adults who were good.
Yes, yeah. The mentor.
Who they attached themselves to, which is consistent with the resilience literature.
Yeah.
And then if they became parents, they did it with intention, and they took parenting classes, and they read books, and adolescence is really the adolescence of your child is the hardest time for adult survivors of horrific abuse, because they don't know what to do. And the kid is going, I hate you, and you're a terrible parent. And they come in and they're like, oh my God, I failed. It's like, no, you are safe enough for them to say these things to you. Was it ever safe enough for you to say this to your parents? Well, actually, now that you say that.
So listen, unfortunately, we're going to wrap up our recorded version today. Laura, this has been
yes. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, and it really just is a wonderful. It was a wonderful time for all of us. So we're going to hang around for those who are still watching. If you want to hang out with us and go get a drink and come back, and we're going to talk for a little while before we sign off. So thank you all for attending, and for those of you who want to let your friends know they can watch the recorded version, that should be online at Psych Incubator and on Strategic Psychotherapeutics in the next couple of days. So thank you all for attending, and hang around with us and enjoy a little bit more unscripted talk. Thank you.
This was very unscripted on my end.
Thank
Bye,
you again.
folks.
The best.